You're with Kat Feeney on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland.
In an ideal world, your loved one should be a source of comfort and offer some kind of sense of security, right? But when your partner becomes emotionally disconnected or even unresponsive, then it's pretty easy to feel fairly lonely, sad, or hurt. After all, it's an emotional connection that holds or binds your relationship together in the first place. So if you're feeling this kind of disconnect, what could be behind that weakening in the bonds that hold your relationship together, and what can you do about it? Dr. Rachel Hannam is the director of North Brisbane Psychologists. Rachel, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Surely every relationship encounters disagreements, conflict at times. So when does it shift from a temporary falling out to losing a deeper emotional connection?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when relationships experience a lot of criticism and blame, people feel very judged, rejected, or even abandoned, we can go into a shame state. And I'm very pleased to be talking about this topic because it's not something that people want to talk about, but it's a really important topic because shame, which is a feeling of not being good enough, feeling like you're at fault, feeling like there's something wrong with you, this is kind of bad vulnerability that just unravels relationships and leaves people feeling isolated and powerless and disconnected, and it can be a vicious cycle.
Bad vulnerability. Now, that's an interesting term because I hear a lot about the need to be vulnerable, and especially with your partners. What is bad vulnerability, Rachel? Can you expand on that, please?
Sure. Yeah, well, I was sort of doing air quotes when I said that because vulnerability in itself is not bad. Good vulnerability helps us create safe connections, meaningful relationships, to be seen and accepted as we are, speaking our mind with our whole heart and getting empathy is good vulnerability. But if we don't have relationships where we can do that and we don't have the resources to recover from feeling rejected, feeling this shame state, then we can end up feeling super disconnected, and it's a kind of vulnerability where we just feel isolated and all alone and unworthy, and that leads to more kind of shutting down, pulling away, and it can even lead to things like depression and addiction. So those people who struggle with depression and addiction, eating disorders and other kinds of mental health struggles feel very vulnerable. They don't have the resources to deal with their vulnerability inside themselves or in relationships. I guess that's what I meant by bad vulnerability.
Dr. Rachel Hanam with you on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland, talking about relationships and the disconnect that can creep in a couple from time to time or over a sustained period of time. So, Rachel, just say this conversation is ringing true for you, and you're sitting here thinking, yes, this feels familiar. What do you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot to be said for learning about shame and getting resourced around it. I'll tell you a quick story. One day my husband and I had been to the Sunday markets, and I met somebody who knew somebody I knew really well. And I talked a lot. I was in a very talkative mood. And on the way home, he said to me, I don't think you should have said something, X, whatever it was, to that person. And so one of the areas of vulnerability that people have with regards to shame is speaking out and self-disclosing. And so I felt this feeling of shame, thinking, this is typical of me, I did something wrong, and I'm just, this kind of over disclosing person. And I felt this feeling of shame. This familiar childhood feeling like, I'm not good enough. But I had learned some things about it. So I went to him later on and I said, this is not a criticism of you, but, I'm feeling really bad. When you said this is what it triggered for me. And so the fact that I could recognise it, talk about it, then explain what needs I was trying to meet when I did what I did, but understand what his values were around it. Having that dialogue restored the interpersonal bridge between us. So a small dose of shame like that, if it's followed by a recognition of what's going on and a repair of the connection, can actually be helpful. Unfortunately, a lot of my clients, though, have experienced kind of a lot of subtle shocks, subtle rejections and criticisms, this slow drip, without having the resources to be able to recover from it and kind of reconnect with people in their lives. So learning to recognise shame, learning what the areas you're vulnerable to it, and being able to reach out and speak out about it, and find safe connection again with other people. And our partners, if we can create a relatively safe connection and space with our partners, can be a real source of healing from past shame and feeling good about ourselves again. So this is what I do when I work with couples, is to help them have that safe connection with each other and have corrective experiences so that they can, feel good about themselves again, feel safe, and find ways to talk about these things.
ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland's where you find yourself this afternoon. Dr. Rachel Hannam is from North Brisbane Psychologists. She's the director of that clinic. My name is Kat, and we're focusing on relationships this Avi, and what can happen when two people drift apart, disconnect, whether it's because of a slow drip, as Rachel put it, fed by instances of shame where you felt shame, you felt rejected, and that could have a deleterious impact on your relationship. So, Rachel, what do you do, though, if, you set about trying to restore that connection? How realistic do you need to be about the kind of time frame? Like, it doesn't strike me as the type of thing, and especially if it's going on for, subtly over a longer period of time, it doesn't seem like the sort of thing that you can kind of fix overnight. So how can we be realistic about addressing this issue?
Definitely. Well, I think that people need a lot of courage, first of all, to be able to, figure out what they're feeling and then put it into words with their partner in a way that doesn't sound like criticism to their partner. And so often when I teach couples how to just say what they feel and say what they need, even that can be all it takes for their partner to perceive that they're being criticised, that they're not good enough. Even that can trigger their partner's shame. So it's delicate work, and as you say, it's a real process. It doesn't happen overnight. But as we learn how to recognise emotions and identify what our needs are, and we can focus on feeling triggered, feeling angry, feeling hurt, feeling ashamed as an indicator that there's something that really matters to us. There's something of great value or importance to us. And maybe we're not sure what that is, but I encourage couples to put their focus on what is it that I want or that matters to me here that I'm not getting, and try and talk about that with each other in order to stay out of blame, judgment and criticism, which are the things that perpetuate shame and fear and anxiety in relationships. So that's one tip, is to focus on underneath the emotions that you're feeling is something you're needing or wanting, and talk about what that is.
Just a reminder that today's chat with Rachel's of a general nature, and if you are having problems with your relationship, you're advised to see the appropriate professional in person. 5 minutes to 2, ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland. So we've covered off on a lot of things here, Rachel, and it is a very complex, nuanced, individual situation. But what would be your sort of top tip, your parting message, your piece of advice to impart this afternoon?
I would say that people who are really frozen and stuck in feeling bad about themselves need to practice self-compassion, to tell themselves they're doing the best they can. It's not my fault that I'm struggling, because compassion begins with self-compassion. And so, when we can see that we're just trying our best, doing our best, but there's still more we can learn, then we're more likely to be able to reach out for help and make some changes in our lives, open up and be vulnerable again, when we start being very kind to ourselves.
Rachel, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Dr. Rachel Hannam, the director of North Brisbane Psychologists. And if this chat's raised any concerns that you might have, then remember that there are people that you can talk to. You can call Relationships Australia on 1300 364 277. That's 1300 364 277, and the number for Beyond Blue is 1300 22 4636.
On your radio and online.
At home or on the road.
This is ABC Radio.